Welcome to Boston TechCrunch Live. I'm Matt Burns. I'm thrilled to be here. We're hosting a special event today, and it's all about Boston. Several times a year, TechCrunch Live likes to take a virtual trip to different cities across North America to highlight the different ecosystems in those areas. And today we're in Boston. In June, we're going to Atlanta, and maybe we'll check out some other areas later this year. We have 2 hours of programming for you today, and you get to hear from some of the best and the brightest in the Boston area. You're going to hear from Greg Dracon of 406 Ventures, Matt Caulfield of Oort. He's one of the many CEOs of the cybersecurity firms that call Boston home. We have Mr. Boston Robots himself, Mark Raybert, speaking on Boston Dynamic and his role as the leader of the Boston Dynamics Hyundai AI Institute. That's a mouthful. Then we're going to have a conversation with Mask Challenges CEO Kat Broom on the role and growth of the nonprofit program. Both were recorded earlier, and I've got to say, you have to watch these things, and you're going to want to hear what Kat and Mark has to say about building companies in Boston. Lastly, we have to have a pitch off, so we do. It's hosted by TechCrunch's Hyatt Camps, and we have 3 early-stage Boston companies that are competing to be fast-tracked into TechCrunch's Startup Battlefield 200 cohort. With that, they get free admission and exhibition space at TechCrunch's Disrupt conference this September in San Francisco. That pitch off starts in about an hour and a half from now, and I hope you stick around for it. I have one announcement, and then we're going to talk to Greg and Matt. Today's event is all virtual, but TechCrunch is hosting a huge in-person event in Boston this April. It's just for early stage founders. If that's you, there's still space available, and the TechCrunch or events team tells me the tickets are currently discounted. So I guess that means they're going to go up sometime soon. Jump on it before they jump in price. The event is in April. It's called Early Stage. And it features roundtables, Q&As with investors, workshops, and pitch deck trainings. And then I'll be hosting a pitch coaching session with our Startup Battlefield editor, Nisha Tambe. There's a lot happening around early stage in Boston, too. And the TechCrunch events team tells me that they're going to be emailing attendees with invites to exclusive community events really soon. I really, truly hope to see you there. So with that, let's go to Greg and Matt. And I want to talk about their fair city, Boston, Massachusetts. Greg, Matt, how are you?
Doing well, thanks, Matt. How about yourself?
Oh, good. Now that fair city, that felt really good to say. I'm a huge listener of Car Talk Radio. They really painted Boston in a good light for me.
It's one of many good shows here.
Yeah, Greg, let's start with you. You've been investing in the Boston area since 2007. What keeps you in Boston?
Boy, there's a lot to list there. I mean, Boston is one of those communities that has all the different ingredients you need to build companies. A lot of good technology, good institutions, tons of graduates coming out with tech degrees, early adopters close by, train ride away. There's everything so close here that if you pick the right segment and end domain, it's really, really your advantage to build a startup here. So we formed 406 here 17 years ago, purposely because it's great. Boston is great for the 3 areas in which we invest, and it continues to thrive.
Yeah. Now, if only you guys could have a winning baseball team, it would be all set. So, according to PitchBook, the Boston area is the 4th largest VC investment market in the country, trailing in order San Francisco, New York City, and LA. But numbers are one thing. I'm hoping, Greg and Matt, if you can tell me what the vibe is like right now going in 2023.
Yeah, I'm happy to start, Matt, or feel free to jump in.
Yeah, Greg, let's start with you.
Certainly. So the vibe is actually really, really strong here, I believe. Boston used to be where venture capital started. So way back in the 70s and 80s, this is where it began. We have what was called the Telecom Highway, which is a interstate Route 128 that goes kind of west of Boston. And then, frankly, we kind of lost our mojo a little bit. I think a lot of investors were going later stage. They moved west. Obviously, there's a lot of great stuff going out west, but we've never lost the ability to build really deep technology. We're not great at marketing ourselves in some ways. So there are certain areas that I would not recommend Boston for. But if you're building any companies that are doing deep technology, it's never left. What has changed in the past, I'd say, decade and a half since we started 406, is that whereas prior, if you built a great company and you were acquired, you were often moved to wherever that acquirer was headquartered. And there were very few public company success stories here. That's changed a lot. We now have a lot of public companies that went public, stayed here. We have big companies like VMware and others buying companies and creating their headquarters for certain divisions here. So Boston, in my opinion, has only gotten better over the past decade and a half. Never lost its mojo, but now I think we have the full flywheel spinning from startup to building to selling. And then we have those entrepreneurs just wanting to do it again and again. So we're excited to be here. We feel we were lucky to pick Boston 17 years ago, and now we're kind of in the catbird seat. We try not to tell too many investors because we enjoy having it here to ourselves.
Yeah. Now, Matt, what's your take on the Boston market right now?
Yeah, no, it's an awesome vibe. I think right now there's a lot of trepidation going into 2023 from an economic perspective, and potentially a little bit of investment holdback. However, I think historically going into this year, like Greg said, like echoing everything that he said, it's just an awesome scene that's a good mixture of different types of resources that lend themselves really well to where we are today, which is a vibrant community that isn't just SaaS companies. It's a really strong mixture of health tech and biotech and security and fintech and all of these other pieces. It's like you almost have a microcosm of New York and San Francisco in Boston. So there's a little bit of everything for everybody.
If you could identify what type of person or what type of founder is a good founder fit for the Boston area, and then Greg, for you too, what's a good founder fit for 406? Matt, can we start with
the founder fit for Boston? So also echoing what Greg said, that this is a deep tech place, whether it's biotech or it's security. These companies, and there are other things that are a little bit lighter, but for example, I live out in the boonies. In my backyard, the town over, there's a prototype fusion reactor, which is from Commonwealth Fusion, which is out of MIT, but it's like, you're not going to find that everywhere in the country. Just the amount of deep tech, especially like cybersecurity, these are deep like systems problems. And so if you're solving a hard technical problem, I can't think of a better place than Boston to do it.
Great. Greg?
Yeah, so as far as what kind of founders we look for, we focus on three segments: enterprise healthcare, data and cloud, and cybersecurity. I lead our cyber practice. We look for the same type of entrepreneurs across the board. That is, Matt's a perfect prototype: deep technology understanding, great network to get a company off the ground and hire that key team. And then ideally, someone that can sell the first $1 million to $3 million of ARR of a company. So founders that have that tech background, but also are out there in the community and know how to build and have the energy that people are attracted to.
Mm-hmm. And then what about Boston? What have you seen in Boston over the years?
From the entrepreneurial standpoint?
Yeah, what type of founder tends to be successful there?
So I don't want to repeat too many things Matt said, but they tend to be those that are networked into the tech communities. You have to be, it's a bit of a combination of an introvert extrovert in my mind. And I say that only because I'm right in the middle. If you do that test, I'm slightly introverted, but I can play extrovert when I need to. We find good founders are introverted enough, often have that tech background, but they can get out there, build those networks up, know how to sell. They can turn it on when they have to. And Boston has a lot of them, honestly. There are 128 colleges and universities in Massachusetts alone, and they all have specialist degrees in cyber. There's almost 40 now that offer cybersecurity bachelor programs. And then if you expand that to the rest of New England, there's 250 universities and colleges. So there's just so many STEM graduates here. You often find that persona I'm describing.
Yeah, exactly. We need to talk about cybersecurity because both of you are heavily involved in that. What do you think makes Boston so unique or drawn to that work?
Yeah, I could take that one. I think from a cyber perspective, there's a rich history here of cyber companies getting off the ground, whether that's so for example, in just Greg's portfolio at Point 406, companies like Carbon Black, companies like Randori, like were recently acquired by IBM. So really strong companies, but also beyond that, like Rapid7, for example, is here. Sneak is here. Some people will say that Datadog is becoming a security company. So Datadog. I think there's a rich history of it. But like, why is that happening? It comes back to that kind of deep tech background. I guess two things. One would be like, you've got MIT where you have a lot of that kind of, cryptography research going on and a lot of really deep technical expertise, both there as well as other universities and colleges around here. The half joking reason that I usually use is that it's a nice stopover point between Tel Aviv and the West Coast. And so there's a confluence here of academic research as well as the right talent from Israel, which is, at least a big part of our company.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Well, let's talk about Oort for just a moment. Tell me about what you guys do and where you're going right now.
Sure. So Oort, we are a Series A cybersecurity company based in Boston, obviously. We focus on the problem of account takeover. So if you think of any enterprise, go back, think about last year. Okta had a breach back in January. Over the summer, you had a series of breaches, everything from Twilio to Uber to a bunch of airlines. And then later in the year, you've got companies like GitHub and Slack and things like this. All of these, there's a pattern. It's no longer hackers, exploiting like software vulnerabilities because of errors in code and like buffer overflows. That's not what's happening. What's happening now is employee accounts at these companies, whether it's Uber or Twilio or Okta or whatever, are having those accounts taken over by hackers through phishing and through spear phishing and tricking those employees to giving over their credentials and pressing the allow button on their multi-factor app so they can get in. Unfortunately, there's not much out there looking at this. Everything that we have in our security toolbox is looking at network logs and looking at device telemetry, but really looking at what are these identities? Who are they? What do they have access to? What are they doing with that access is absent today from the security toolbox. And that's exactly what Oort does. Oort comes into an enterprise organization. We give you the lay of the land. Here's your identity attack surface. You've got 10,000 identities that could be taken over in any moment. And here are the ones that are most vulnerable. And we help you fix that. And then we help you monitor the behavior of those identities going forward, just in case somebody does take it over. And so this is like the number one attack vector. And we're right there helping enterprise chief security officers stop it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How did you meet Greg, Matt?
It's a good question. I think we were introduced by a mutual acquaintance like a couple of years ago. Greg, is that right?
I think that's right. Maybe one of our CISO council members.
Yes, definitely. Michael Smith, I recall. So we met just through the ecosystem. So to Greg's point, it's all about networking here. And we're fortunate that we're not at the size of like New York where you can't really know everybody. If you're in security in Boston, you can pretty much know who's who, like who's out there and who everybody is. And so Greg, when I think about him, he is my go-to guy for cybersecurity investing in Boston. Everybody knows Greg as the cybersecurity investor in the Boston scene.
Yeah, generally, Greg, I list the board seats that you have during my intro, but you have too many. I didn't have time to do that. Yeah, how do you keep up? But really, I would like to know what brought you to Matt and Oort at the beginning.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we are pretty thematic investors. So every year we try to develop theses around what problems need to be solved that we can't find a solution for. So a couple of years ago, our team developed a thesis around identity security. And at that time, if you recall, the pandemic kind of accelerated this trend of you want to work wherever you are, whenever you want to. And the perimeter just disappeared. We used to all log into a network or we'd VPN into our company, all gone very, very quickly. So it accelerated this problem that the perimeter, the identity became the perimeter. And now people have more than just employees. They've got contractors, they've got service accounts. Everything's touching your infrastructure. And as Matt said, hackers don't hack in anymore, they log in. It's not that hard to get someone's credentials. So we started looking for a company that really understood how to give a chief information security officer full visibility of his or her identity perimeter. And then more importantly, how to identify attacks. And I must have spent 18 months looking at a couple dozen companies solving pieces of the identity problem. And I felt like they're all very interesting, some great entrepreneurs, but they weren't doing a big enough piece of the pie. And that's a little bit of the scar tissue from Carbon Black. The old antivirus world was completely turned on its head by EDR, endpoint detect and response, where you started to look at behaviors instead of just signatures of bad things touching your infrastructure. So when I met Matt through our mutual friend, the light bulb, it was exactly what I'd been looking for, frankly. They not only could look at, I won't give you their secret sauce, how they do it, but they can't only tell you your identity perimeter in a static basis, but they go a step further and look at dynamic movement of people touching these identities and can monitor the vulnerabilities for you. So they help you make it more secure, but then they also help you kind of keep an eye on everything and make sure that you're not breached. So it just fit a thesis that we developed, knew very quickly when I met Matt and his team. They're the type of founders we love. And we were lucky to let them join us on their journey about a year ago.
What do you remember about that first pitch meeting?
The first pitch meeting, man, Matt, you're gonna have to remind me about this one. I think
That's a good one. So I think we got connected between rounds, Greg. So it wasn't, and this is important for anybody listening, is like, you don't build a relationship with a VC in the process of raising your round. I think getting to know them kind of in between, in this case, between seed and Series A. And for us, that was a, 18-month time period. And I think somewhere in there got to talking to Greg. And so when it came time to raise the Series A, it wasn't like going out and scrambling. It was like, I called up 3 of the investors who I thought would be awesome to work with. Greg was one of them. And then we took it from there. So the pitch, I guess, is less important than the relationship.
No, that's good advice. And then in Boston, you guys have said several times that it's the community factor. And that's really what makes the other big markets work, especially Silicon Valley. There's constant reinvestment from community members back into the community. So tell me what it's been like to build your company around competitors and like-minded founders.
Yeah, the community here is really strong. I think Boston is sort of in a Goldilocks zone as far as its size. It's not too big, not too small. So it's actually possible to network with the vast majority of people and get to know who are the pre-seed investors, who are the seed investors, who are the Series A investors, like who's who, as well as other startups. I talk to other founders in the Boston area all the time to bounce ideas around. Greg, no offense, but to ask impressions on VCs and like, who do you like working with? It's really good to have that network to bounce off of. I think for us, as far as like community resources, there's the people, so other founders and the investors, and then I think there are like third parties. Like you're talking to Mass Challenge in a little bit. I think like Mass Challenge, for example, is a program that we went through, which was really helpful. It's obviously named Mass Challenge, it's named after Massachusetts. Brought in 100 different incubation stage startups when we did it in 2019. Very quickly after I left Cisco, I went through Mass Challenge, and it was just like an awesome entry point into meeting not just security companies, but getting a foothold into the whole Boston cybersecurity, startup ecosystem.
Founders outside in the smaller markets about relocating their company to a bigger market where there is a community.
Man, that's a tough question. I decided to start a company where I was at, and came to Boston for a very good reason, which was like, it's the perfect place to start a tech career. Honestly, even if you're not going to create a startup someday, it's a really good place. As far as like if you're coming from a smaller market, I'd say if you can make it where you are, cool. I think Boston is always very welcoming, and it's such a right-sized community that is very easy to get here and get to know people fairly quickly and be off and running. I'd say in that my first year after leaving Cisco, which is where I used to be, I found my way to talking to about 100 different chief security officers, and I probably met that year. I think I was measuring my LinkedIn. I left the big company with like 300 LinkedIn connections and ended the year with about 1,000. So it's really easy. Just dive in and start meeting people.
And now, Greg, investors are notorious for wanting to invest in local people or making people move. Is that you? Do you like your investments to move into your area?
No, we don't force it, honestly. And the world is becoming smaller every day, especially with some of the technology out there to allow people to work remotely. That said, we're pretty early stage investors. We typically are leading Series A rounds. When you're starting to build a company, if there is an inside sales motion of any type, it's very helpful to build a culture in a nexus in one place. It doesn't have to be the whole company, but culture building is tough when everyone's remote, or you have to spend the same amount of money to bring them together frequently enough that you'd probably be spending on an office. The one thing that Matt mentioned that Boston is really good is it's the right size city, but if you're starting a company here, when you're hiring folks, there are just a lot of really, really smart people around here. So it's very easy to build a really good core team in the area, and then you can supplement them with remote workers wherever they are if you're looking for the best and brightest. But when you start sales, it's really nice to be close to cities that have early adopters. And for cyber, not to talk too much about cybersecurity, a lot of the early adopters are the banks in New York. The financial services are always been, the early folks trying out the best cyber solutions rather than buying from just the large corporates. So it's nice to be a train ride away and have the ability to hire the right people close by and supplement it. Sure. So not religious about it by any means. We do have companies that are purely remote. I have one that has, I think out of 50 people, they're in 29 states. So they're pretty dispersed. But again, they go through very thoughtfully, how do you bring people together and make them feel like they belong to something, even though that they're not in the same office together.
Absolutely. And that's something that we struggle with at TechCrunch too. We're extremely remote. Everyone works out. I don't know if this is popular knowledge, but we don't have very many people in the Valley anymore. Most people live outside the Valley. Everyone left during COVID. So we struggle with that too. Now we have a question from the audience. And if you want to ask a question too, you can drop it in the chat and hop in. We have people watching that. I was going to ask this question too, but it's really interesting. What Boston companies are you seeing delivering strong spinouts in reference to like a PayPal mafia? Is there some sort of thing happening in Boston?
I'll take that, Matt, a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
So again, I'll be a little cyber specific if that's okay.
No, that's great.
Part of this flywheel that's great is that we've got companies that are exiting for nice amounts and spitting out entrepreneurs. So just one example, Matt mentioned we were early investors in Carbon Black. Used to be called Bit9, acquired a company called Carbon Black and changed the name. Carbon Black itself, we've backed 2 companies that have spun out of Carbon Black. I know there are others that have spun out. Obsidian is now on the West Coast. So I'd say there's probably 5 or 6 companies that spun out of Carbon Black alone. Vericode's another one that has a few that have spun out. Cloud Health was another one that we backed. It's one of the beautiful things about an ecosystem, especially when people aren't always leaving, is that folks that feel success together, either whether it's an early success or something that went public like a Carbon Black, that feeling that they've had as a team that galvanizes them because they've often gone through tough times as well as having a great exit, it builds something that you can't really kind of put your finger on that allows them to go do their next company with a different kind of scar tissue that seems to catapult them. And we see it through Resilient Systems. There's another one here that has spun out a bunch. Rapid7 has spun a bunch out. Mm-hmm. So there are a bunch, and that's that flywheel I was referring to. To that person's question, HubSpot has now a couple I can think of. Wayfair on the consumer side. I think even Klaviyo is starting to, even though they haven't exited yet. But there's some great companies that are spitting out great entrepreneurs when they're ready to do their own thing.
Tell me about the Angel Network in the Boston area. How active is it, and who's somebody that everyone should know?
Yeah, Matt, feel free if you
take that. Yeah, so I got my pre-seed round done with a good group of angels, a good syndicate, I guess would be the right word, of angels. So not an angel, but awesome pre-seed fund. Drew Volpe over at First Star Ventures led our pre-seed, but then he was joined by people like Sam Clemens, who founded Insight Squared. We had Mike Vistuso, who was one of the founders of Carbon Black. We had Bob Mason, who now has his own VC firm called Argon Ventures. Bob's a great guy, and most people at the pre-seed stage should meet Bob. He was actually my first kind of foray outside of a big company to start dipping my toe into the water of the startup ecosystem. I showed him a pitch deck in like 2018 that was horrible, and he was so nice and gave me lots of great feedback on it. And we've come a long way since then. But yeah, there's a really strong angel ecosystem. There's a lot of people who have seen success here, whether it's in cybersecurity or startups in general, where they're not only willing to maybe invest some money, but also invest their time and their connections and their advice. And I am, to be honest, totally dependent on that, and feel very good about what we've done with the angels that we've brought on board.
Yeah, Greg.
Yeah, I was going to tag on to what Matt said. As any of the founders out there that might be listening, building your network of angels, and you can even call them mentors at the time. That's what Matt did really, really effectively. He just asked for advice. They offered great advice. They often have scar tissue. Some put money in. They're also really well networked for those folks that may not have kind of come to the community with a built-in network. That's where you can really amplify your efforts really, really well. So I think all the angels Matt mentioned are great. I'd say I haven't counted recently, but I believe we have 20 plus institutional angel networks now as well in the area. So there's a lot of folks out there that come together as a group to look at deals together in a specific domain. So you get that great experience of scar tissue in the segment that you're operating. So you beat that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to ask about the universities and the institutions in the area. From an insider's point of view, what are their role in building the startup ecosystem there? Greg?
Yeah, I'll start. I think there are probably 3 aspects. So the first is a lot of the universities here that are deep tech, like an MIT, Harvard's got, Northeastern's got some great stuff. They have labs that they're also often doing tech transfer. They're trying to spin companies out. So if you want to really, really look at companies and technologies that are coming out of good research labs, that's there in spades. If you're a little further down the chain and have started your company and want to start scaling, I already mentioned we've got more STEM grads than anyone in the country, I believe, per capita. I think we graduate almost 40,000 a year, if I recall, in STEM alone.
That's a lot.
So lots of great people to be able to hire. And then we also have very entrepreneurial students. And I really am jealous of this because when I was in school, like, back in the caveman days, being an entrepreneur was not in vogue. If you came out of school and went to an IBM or some other place, otherwise you were too risky and you're probably going to end up living with your parents. So now there are so many entrepreneurship programs combined with venture raising or a certain domain like a cyber that these students are popping up with tech backgrounds, with deep domain, with this spirit that they want to build something right out of school. I think it's just awesome. So I think those are the three aspects I think the universities really contribute.
Matt?
Everything Greg said, one other thing that's a little out there, I love just going to MIT and like sitting in on a lecture, especially if it's an open one, is like the most mind-opening thing, or even like Harvard, if you can get in, it's just a good opportunity to like expand what you're thinking about and see things from a different perspective. And so from like a founder perspective or product management perspective, I spent a lot of time doing that actually when I was still in the kind of finding my path through the jungle phase of the startup. I hadn't, filled my calendar with customer meetings yet because we were still trying to figure out what we were building. And like a lot of that kind of openness in terms of thought is really helpful. And then exactly what Greg said, which is like hiring, having that pool of talent is so, so important. I know one other founder who was like, yeah, when I start companies, I just go hire 10 PhDs from across the river and like, we get started. Whatever comes out is going to be cool. Like, I don't know what's going to be, but like, if you have the right people in the room, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's what early stage investors like to hear, right, Greg?
Well, yes and no. I would say the one thing that if there is a downside, and not that there is much here, because obviously I'm a Boston fan, you find really, really smart people sometimes building things and hoping to find the problem they may solve. And obviously, when you're building a company, you have to focus on the value it's providing the customer and solving a business problem. So occasionally we'll see the tech transfer. It's more a really cool hammer without a nail yet. But the really smart people figure out which nail to go after first, and they just keep knocking them down.
Yeah. Now, Greg, I have a question from the audience for you. David Walsh asks, be interested to hear how a VC like 406 can help a startup transition from technology proof to broader commercialization.
Great question. We could spend a lot of time on this. I'll try to be brief. So one of the things we aim in my firm, many of us were operators before we became investors. So we came to 406 with a bunch of scar tissue of trying to build our own stuff or manage our own teams. So we're very intent on when we invest in a company, if we don't think we can add value beyond capital, we typically don't engage. It's kind of where our name 406 came from and how Ted Williams got to that batting average. He let a lot of strikes go by they didn't swing at because they weren't in his hot zone. So we try to invest only in companies that we think we can make a difference. Some of that value add that I think David's asking about is we come with a network ourselves. So oftentimes we're helping our companies hire, especially early stage. They've got a few holes in the management team. We want to help them fill those holes with not only people we know, but we also use a lot of people from our portfolio that have had exits and have had success and that scar tissue. They're great hires to bring in because they're accelerating your trajectory. And then we also have a pretty good network of service providers, Keiretsu around the portfolio. We don't invest in competitive companies, so a lot of them use each other's products. And we also share, so at the CEO level, we'll bring CEOs together for a summit to compare notes within cyber. We've got a bunch just in that domain. They can kind of compare notes on how they're building, what struggles they're having, and then they have each other to lean on over time. And we do that for CEOs, CTOs, CFOs, CMOs. So we try to leverage the 70 some odd companies in our portfolio to help each other. And then personally, we try to bring the right scar tissue that we might be able to bear to our companies to give them outsized advantage. And the last thing, I apologize, we have pretty large councils of experts in each of our areas. So in mine and Matt's case, we've got a council of about 45 chief information security officers. They look at deals with us, which is obviously ground truth, and that's incredibly helpful to my team. But they also become advisors of our companies. Some become investors, some become board members, and they often drive the first $1 million or $2 of ARR because they're CISOs of big companies typically. So we try to give our companies a bit of a head start from the revenue standpoint, team building, and then just all the scar tissue that we have from the companies as well as our own experiences to help them avoid the mistakes we made, frankly.
That was a good sales pitch. I like that.
No.
What's the best way to get a hold of you guys?
So my email is gdracon or greg@46ventures.com. Anyone can reach out. It's right on our website. Love to meet more folks out there. So feel free.
I'm Matt, M-A-T-T, at Oort, OORT.io, or just go to Oort.io, OORT.io, and schedule a demo. Happy to show you the product. Get in touch.
Fantastic. One last question. This comes from the audience, and it's a fantastic question. People would love to hear the reflections on how Boston is fostering investors, next generation investors and founders, particularly from diverse backgrounds. Greg, can we start with you?
Sure. And investors are two very different things, obviously. So on one regard, we've done a terrible job pushing diversity in this region over time. So we're doing a lot more in that regard and focusing on it a lot more. And I mean that as a community, not my firm or anyone specific. So I think there's a focus there, and we need to continue to focus on it. On the founder side, it also goes a little back to some of the education in the schools. We want to continue to collaborate with these universities and make sure we're finding people when they're coming out to help them get off the ground before they take a different path. So find the budding entrepreneur, give them some success early, and I think that success breeds success. So I think on the founder side, we can engage more with the universities. On the investor side, we just need more folks to be interested in this side of the world and come, in my case, with some operational experience, go try to start something. Even if you've failed, to me, that's almost more valuable than early success. So go out, try something that is in and around our ecosystem, and then talk to different VCs out there and see if you want to move to this side of the table, or go build something, have a great success, and then you can start your own firm or join a firm that backed you.
You like that scar tissue?
Love the scar tissue.
That's good. I like to hear that. And Matt, tell me what it's like to hire diverse technical talent.
Yeah, and to answer, well, I'll answer two questions. Both the one that you answered, Greg, asked of Greg, which is like, I see the best way to create, a more diverse base of founders is by hiring them in-house in an early stage company like us. Because most founders, successful ones, I don't recommend going the route that I went, which is like never working for a startup, only working for a Fortune 500, and then starting a company. I think it would have been much easier to go work for a startup first and then start one. So I highly recommend that path. And so when I'm building my executive team, I think a lot about diversity and I really care about it. And then you also asked about technical talent. I think technical talent comes from all over the world. For us, we have people from 4 different continents working on our product from a technical perspective. Yes, the center of gravity is in Boston, but we really find people from all walks of life and all different cultures. We were just talking about this morning on our all hands about how important and core that is to our mission and our culture and our values at Oort. Just keeping that close, as you're building your company, I think will just really reinforce and create a positive feedback loop in the Boston ecosystem.
That's a great answer. And we're out of time, but I guess one last thing, I've been wondering this in the entire interview. Matt, what the hell does Oort mean?
I get that question all the time. So Oort is named after the Oort cloud, which is this ring or sphere of comets orbiting the outside edge of the solar system. You can think about that like any enterprise being orbited by a swirling mass of identities, employees, contractors, third parties. That's Oort. It's like, it's huge, it's out there, and we're going to discover it together.
That's an extremely nerdy name, and I would expect nothing less from a Boston startup.
It's on brand.
Yeah, it is. Greg, Matt, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for participating in our city spotlight of Boston. It's been a thrill. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for having us, Matt.
Yeah. And next up, I hope you stick around for the next interview. We have Mark Raybert coming up. He's the founder of Boston Dynamics. And then he's also leading the new Hyundai AI Institute, co-partnered with Boston Dynamics. There's some relationship. I don't really know, but Brian is going to explain in the next segment. Thank you so much. And we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.